on sharing my autism experience. Just to outline what I'll be going over today, first off, I want to explain what autism is. Obviously, this is a lay audience, so I don't expect you to have any prior knowledge of what autism is, except perhaps the biases that you brought into the room today. Then I'll go over my presentation process, what my plans are for the future, thanks and acknowledgments to those who have been so helpful to me through the course of this project, and then some final thoughts that I've ended all of my presentations with. So first off, what is autism? Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by impaired social interaction, difficulty with verbal and nonverbal communication, repetitive or restricted behaviors, and, although not all autistic individuals have them, in many cases, sensory issues. Some examples, often a stereotype and an accurate one of that, is that autistic individuals lack the ability to make eye contact with others. They often have gazes which zoom around the room and don't focus on human eyes. Then inappropriate or non-existent verbal responses. Often autistic individuals, myself obviously not included, have difficulty in either communicating with others or are often non-verbal themselves, so incapable of communicating with others in a verbal manner. Then lack of facial expression recognition, so the inability to tell what an angry face or a happy face or a sad face looks like. Unable to distinguish between these faces and being unable to respond appropriately to people's emotional signals. And then this one is particularly literal speech and interpretation. So particularly in Asperger's syndrome, which I personally have, I was diagnosed at the age of 4, is the habit of taking, well, not habit, but the tendency to take things very literally. So an example from my own personal experience is having an English paper that needed to be 3 to 5 pages. I handed in 3 physical pages and was docked for marks because I didn't make it long enough. Now, there wasn't 3 pages worth of text, there were 3 physical pages. To my mind, I had completed the assignment to its requirements. To my teacher's mind, she did not disagree. She did not agree. That was fun. So, how would I want to start the project? Why do I want to go over autism itself? So, to begin my project, what I wanted to do was how I wanted to start my project was, okay, I want to present about autism. How do I do that? Well, I could just go and talk to people, or I could get help from Mr. Poulakakis, who's over there, by the way, thank him later, and ask, who should I talk to? Would there be anyone interested in talking to? And he recommended MOLT, which on the next slide you'll see the acronym, but stands for, if I remember correctly, the Maine Autism Leadership Team. And they're based, as I understand it, at Woodside Elementary School, who has a phenomenal autism program, by the way. Then I wanted to get in touch with past ed techs. Unfortunately, I was only able to get in touch with one, mostly because of time restraints and because it was difficult to find people's emails. And so I did end up talking with her about my experience in the elementary school level. And then I set about researching autism itself. My research came twofold. First, I essentially delved myself into the internet and looked through a variety of sources. First off, I started with Wikipedia. Just Wikipedia being not so much a great thing for, say, English papers because your teachers won't accept that as a source, but as a good way of getting a foundation knowledge of what autism is. As I have it, sometimes my perceptions are off from what autism truly is, as it is a spectrum, autism spectrum. And then I went over specifically autistic websites, such as Autism Society, which is a society which promotes autistic awareness and groups and activities and such to help autistic individuals, both children and adults, move through the social construct. And then Wrong Planet, which is actually made by autistic individuals for autistic individuals as a forum to discuss topics and issues. And then I read essays by autism activists. I watched TED Talks about what autism is, and from a scientific perspective, looking through the scientific literature, seeing on what genes would we find autism coding genes, in what parts of the brain are usually affected by autism. What is the characteristic of an autistic brain? My second part was a more personal side. Again, I wanted to talk to past ed techs. See, I don't really remember a lot of my childhood, so I asked my past ed techs, what was I like? What difficulties did I have? How did I pull through those? Then talking, of course, to Malt as the main artist. Oh, good, I got it right. And communicating with them to see what groups might be interested in hearing me talk and wanted my help, really. Then relatives, parents, of course, but others in the community who have grown up with me. Again, don't really remember the childhood thing. And then others with autism, which is actually a point I'll be bringing out later. So then, presenting. I had two major groups of presenting over the course of the year. First, I presented to a parent group, parent and social worker group organized by Malt itself at Woodside Elementary. And then my second was for support staff, which I actually gave over there. That was the room, the Spanish room specifically, that I gave the presentation in. And that was to support staff such as bus drivers, wait staff at the cafeteria, and then social workers and ed techs. And that, of course, was at Maranatha High School. So I didn't really take pictures of the actual venues in and of themselves because I didn't feel that appropriate. But this is what the room looked like. This wasn't at the day of the presentation. But one of the few before I continue, I must admit that I don't really have challenges to discuss because everything went wonderfully. I was asked by Malt to give my first presentation and asked by the school to give my second presentation. I never had to really go. I put myself out there, of course, knowing that I was available, but I was asked by others to give my various presentations. So the most crucial component of my capstone wasn't really a challenge. However, going late in the evening after a full day of school and talking to people for 2 hours about autism was a little tiring. And so the crowd was composed of parents and specifically social workers. And so my focus was on really what strategies I had developed over the years to really give an appearance of being quote unquote normal. The more technical term, by the way, would be neurotypical. That is the less offensive way of saying that someone is either autistic, which would be neuroatypical, or non-autistic, neurotypical, instead of saying normal, because that's insulting. And so I discussed what strategies I had developed. For instance, and this is just an example, some of them are difficult to verbalize and you really need sort of an in-depth. But the way I have learned to make eye contact is that whenever I'm looking at someone, I look into their right eye. Because that, as I learned on a NOVA documentary actually, is how we humans express emotion. This is our emotional side of our face. And if you were actually to sort of splice the face down the middle, say have two mirrors to be able to look at right and left sides, you would see that this is the more expressive part of the face. And it was actually in research with dogs, they found out that one of the reasons that, this is totally off topic by the way, but I just learned it anyway, that dogs seem so sort of human-like, anthropomorphized, and able to communicate with because they are the only other animal that uses that trick and looks at the right side of the face when communicating with us. And so, being not intuitively understanding of that, I took the tip from the dogs, and now I can make eye contact with people. How wonderful is that? And then I developed many other strategies and had a lot of parents ask me quite a lot of personal questions. And one of the things that I'm very happy to do about this is because I'm very open about this. I feel like a lot of people do know that I am autistic, and it's not something that I want to hide from myself, which is something we'll get to later. My second presentation was actually two presentations, which was during a staff development day for social workers and support staff. And I had to wake up early for that. It was on a Friday, and I wanted to sleep in. But no, I didn't get to sleep in. I had to go talk about autism, which I am perfectly okay with, but I had to wake up at 6 o'clock. That was not fun. I was tired. Anyway, to that audience, a lot of that support staff wasn't really familiar with what autism was, and they were coming to learn about what it was. So I focused more on A, what autism is, and B, how one can deal with it in the school environment. For instance, in the parent discussion, a lot of that discussion was in the home. That was talking about how I went through things in the community and in the home environment. That isn't appropriate for support staff to really be knowing about, and it wouldn't really help them anyway. So I discussed primarily how I had done in the social level, at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, and then beyond, of course. And so I focused on, again, my experiences in the school system. Now, the reception, to be perfectly honest, has been wonderful. I have had wonderful parent interactions with many parents who have come up to me and said that they understood their autistic nephew or their autistic child or their autistic parent, really, so much more after seeing my presentation. A lot of the staff, even those who hadn't even come to my presentations, came up to me and thanked me for what I had done because other staff had heard about it and heard very good things about it. And there was a thing for it. It's me. Look at that. That's me. And while the article wasn't accurate in everything, it really did get the voice and my words out to the public, and I was very thankful for that. And so I have had numerous I have had people emailing me and sending me messages on Facebook, and just yesterday, I got a letter from State Senator Linda Baker thanking me for putting my story out there. So the reception really has been phenomenal, and I could not be more thankful for it. What are my future plans then? Well, I have been asked by the superintendent of schools, not to brag or anything, but to be the keynote speaker for the opening of the school on August 25th. And I consider that a great honor, and I look forward greatly to being able to present. I also plan on continue attending conferences. I hadn't mentioned this before, but one of my first things that I did for my presentation was go to the conferences and sort of the meetings that MALT had for parents and share my story. And that was how I was first invited to my first presentation. And so I plan on not only continuing to involve myself in the community, I will be going to Bowdoin College in the fall. So I'm still in this community, and I would still like to be active in this community. And then I will have mentoring opportunities. Specifically, there is one autistic child who is currently at a private school who I will be helping integrate into the school system, into the public school system over the course of the rest of the year. He will be a freshman in the fall, and you may see him in some of your classes, so please be nice to him. Quiet back. And then I have asked those at MALT for really the opportunity to perhaps mentor students with autism, because that is something that I would very much like to do, to give a role model to children who really perhaps don't have one like that. So before I get to my final thoughts, I want to give thanks to Mr. Poulikakis, who has been my mentor and incredibly helpful in setting these things up and sort of guiding me through the process and really introducing me to this world of autistic activism and helping children with autism that I could not have done on my own. So thank you. I would also like to thank Ms. Nucci, who was my contact person for MALT, and then all of MALT themselves for being so helpful in getting me in contact with parents and other social workers. My ed techs in the past, of which I have had many, who have helped me to grow and learn as a human being. I'm getting emotional here, I'm sorry. To Mr. Woodside, my advisor, for being a supportive role model for the past 4 years and indulging my absolute love of science. And then my parents, of course, for being so loving.
I'm not the most.
And I know. I think they can figure that out. So for being so loving and for allowing me to grow into the person that I am now. And so, as a final thought, I would like to go over why present on autism. An interesting question to answer at the end of your slideshow, of course. When I was 7, my parents didn't think that I would ever live out of the house independently. Not because they doubted me or my abilities or my ability to grow, but because things were so difficult for me in terms of social interaction and dealing with the world around me that they never thought I could really be independent. And now I'm here, and I will be going to Bowdoin in the fall, arguably one of the best schools in the nation, living there and meeting students like me and challenging myself in that environment. My reasons for presenting were twofold. One, to educate parents, social workers, adults who do not have autism about what autism is and the difficulties that autistic students go through. My second reason was for autistic students themselves, because until last year, I hadn't met someone really face-to-face and discussed with them, knowing that they had autism, an autistic person. I went through a majority of my life feeling that I was very much alone. Not only because my social difficulties isolated me from the community, but because there was no one I could point to and say, they are like me. And so I wanted to be that person for at least one child to look at and say, they are like me. My hope is that no child may need to feel ashamed for who they are, because if autism is my identity, then maybe it can be theirs. Thank you. Any questions?
Oh, good Lord. Bring a tissue?
I know. Sorry, I'm glad the heck wasn't all the way prepared. I'm sorry. It's all right if no one has questions.
Not
That's
too
just
much.
fine.
Then have you approached Do you plan on doing anything about in college to bring an awareness like that?
One of the reasons that I'm very happy to, oh wow, I did really well. That was almost exactly 15 minutes. Good job, Nate. One of the reasons that I wanted to go to Bowdoin College is because there are many opportunities for Bowdoin students to interact with those in the community. And so I'm hoping that maybe even paid by Bowdoin, I can interact with autistic students in the community through that school. So that was one of the reasons to go there. I have considered, for instance, I'm not sure that autism research, for instance, I've done a lot of research on autism, like autism spectrum in terms of science, because I'm a science guy, as some of you may know. But I do not feel that that will really be a career for me. I am a math guy. I plan on being a math major at Bowdoin because that is truly my passion. And while I still plan on being involved in terms of activism, I don't think that it really might be a career for me. And that may change though. One of the reasons, again, I'm going to Bowdoin is because if the math thing doesn't work out, I have options.
Well, I just didn't know if you had,
sorry,
if they had
that's the
approached you
question.
to, no, if they approached you to do a presentation.
Bowdoin College
with this.
specifically has not approached me to do a presentation. I don't think they know I have autism. I'm not entirely sure. The lady at the financial aid office does, but other than that. Yeah, we talk about it a lot. Any other? Oh,
Was there a specific turning point for you when you realized that, your life was turning around?
Yes, actually, it's a very specific moment. If anyone doesn't mind me getting a little personal here. But it was when I was, I believe, 14 or 15. It was the spring of my freshman year, and I was at a sleepover with a group of friends. What happened was, over the course of my life, I had felt as though I was very different from others. My dad watched a lot of sci-fi, so I got to watch a lot of Star Trek, let's say. And I always sympathized with those characters who weren't human. Because I felt that my characteristics, again, I didn't know anyone else with autism. My characteristics were so, I knew they existed, but I hadn't met them. My characteristics were so different from others that I worried in my little 8-year-old way that, what if I'm not human? What if I am so different from others that I'm literally not the same species? And that worry sort of grew inside me as the years went on. And it was at that moment when I sort of, because a lot of autistic individuals learn how to interact with others through things like media. And I had worried that I was just sort of copying, in the same way, if anyone knows Data from Star Trek, instead of actually understanding emotion, I was simply copying it. But at that sleepover, in an area, in an environment that you can't watch on TV and you can never learn about beforehand, I realized, like, they were talking about the difficulties that they had had over the course of their lives and things that I thought were truly horrible, and I felt genuine emotion for them. And I realized that I could not be copying this emotion. So it must be genuine, I must be human, and suddenly everything kind of rushed together and said, okay, then I belong. And so really that transformation happened in freshman year of high school. Oh dear, that looks space stuff. Let's just close that. That answer the question?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
How conscious are you still, or how much effort do you have to put into to appear neurotypical at this point, or is it like more second nature?
That's a very good question. I get from a lot of people that, especially say my grandparents, that, oh, you don't even seem like you have autism anymore, which I don't take as an insult or anything, but I can still sort of feel the mental adaptation, because like my brain is still autistic, and I know what it's like to feel autistic, and it's actually something that I can kind of turn off and on. If, say, I don't want to interact with someone, you can sort of turn on the autism blinders, and then suddenly, oh, I seem to be socially impaired toward this one person. Oh no, the horror. But it is something that I am still somewhat conscious of, but I can go through my day without ever once thinking, oh yeah, I'm autistic, this used to be difficult. It is much more natural, but I can still feel it in there. Any other questions? Oh, I gotta do